Big Whiskey, Wyoming. A town that wore the mask of civility, hiding behind the dusty wooden buildings and the badge of a brutal sheriff, Little Bill Daggett. In this town, justice wasn't blind. It was corrupt, selective, and wielded by fear. The people walked with their heads down, their spirits crushed beneath the weight of silence and complicity. Dear listeners, before we move forward, please subscribe my channel to hit 1,000 figure. Clint Eastwood's character, William Money, had once turned his back on violence. A former outlaw, haunted by his past, Money had buried his guns and his sins deep beneath the soil of a struggling farm, where he raised his children alone. But when he heard the story of how a cowboy had slashed a woman's face and walked free with nothing but a few ponies as penalty, something inside him stirred. It wasn't just about the girl. It was about a town that had let evil go unpunished. Then came the death of Ned Logan, Money's old friend, captured, tortured, and killed by Little Bill in a display of lawless brutality, hung up in a coffin outside the saloon as a warning. That was the final spark. The town had forgotten what justice meant. But William Money hadn't. The rain fell steadily that night in Big Whiskey, but it wasn't enough to wash away the filth of what had been done. Outside Greeley's saloon, a pine box coffin leaned against the front wall like a macabre decoration. Inside it, the broken body of Ned Logan. His face was swollen, his back marked with the lash of a whip, and his dignity stolen by the very law that claimed to protect order. Above him, a crude sign was nailed to the wood. "This is what happens to assassins." The townspeople passed by in silence, some with bowed heads, others stealing quick glances before hurrying along. No one dared speak out. Little Bill Daggett ruled with an iron hand, cloaking his violence under the guise of keeping the peace. But what peace could come from murdering an unarmed man and displaying him like a hunted animal? Inside Greeley's saloon, the laughter of Little Bill and his deputies echoed, the sound of whiskey glasses clinking and cards being dealt, painting a grotesque picture of celebration. They believed the threat had been extinguished. William Money was out there somewhere, alone, wounded, and broken. Just another washed-up drunk with a reputation long buried. But they didn't understand what they had awakened. At the edge of town, Money stood soaked by the rain, staring at the coffin. His friend, the only man who had stood beside him after all the blood and mistakes, was now nothing more than a public warning. And something changed in his eyes. The farmer was gone. The guilt-ridden widower was gone. What remained was the man the legends spoke of in whispers. He reached for his rifle, rainwater dripping from the stock. Justice wasn't coming to Big Whiskey through the courts or the sheriff's badge. It was coming through him. The saloon was thick with smoke and bravado. Laughter spilled from the tables where Little Bill's men played poker, their boots propped high, rifles slung carelessly, unaware that death was already outside. At the far end, Little Bill himself sipped whiskey, spinning stories about how he'd beaten the meanest outlaw in Wyoming into submission. His voice boomed with pride, twisting the truth while Ned's body lay cold just feet away. Then, without warning, the double doors creaked open. Raindrops splattered onto the wooden floor, carried in by a shadow darker than the storm outside. William Money stepped in. Soaked, wild-eyed, and gaunt, he looked more like a ghost than a man. But in that moment, every head turned and every breath in the room paused. Money didn't speak. He simply raised his shotgun, eyes locked on the bartender behind the counter, Greeley, who had nailed Ned's corpse like a trophy on display. The thunder of the blast shattered the quiet. Greeley flew backward into the wall, his blood painting the mirror behind the bar. Cards dropped, chairs scraped the floor. Before anyone could react, Money spoke, his voice flat, cold, and deliberate. "Who's the fella owns this shithole?" Little Bill rose slowly, stunned. "I own it," he said, taking a step forward. Another shot. The sound was deafening in the close space. The saloon burst into chaos. Money worked his weapon with deadly efficiency. No flourish, no wasted movement. He was the man from the stories now, the real William Money. Not the regretful farmer, not the reformed husband. He was death walking on two legs. Deputies dove for cover. Some tried to draw. It didn't matter. Anyone who reached for a gun fell. The wooden walls of the saloon cracked with bullet holes. Glasses shattered. Men screamed. When the smoke cleared, only a few remained upright. And Money was standing over them all, his eyes still burning with that same terrible, hollow fire. The silence that followed the gunfire was suffocating, thick and heavy like the smoke still curling around the shattered lanterns and bullet-riddled walls. The bodies of Little Bill's men lay sprawled across the blood-soaked floor. Chairs were overturned. The poker table smoldered. All eyes were now on one man, William Money, standing tall amidst the wreckage like a ghost from the frontier's darkest legends. Little Bill Daggett, wounded but alive, groaned as he tried to crawl behind the bar. His bravado, once so towering, had crumbled to dust. The sheriff who had mocked justice, who had tortured Ned to death, was now face to face with a man who didn't just talk about violence. He embodied it. Money stepped forward slowly, shotgun lowered, but ready. Little Bill spat blood onto the floor. "I don't deserve this. I was just trying to keep order." Money didn't flinch. "Deserves got nothing to do with it," he said, his voice like a gravestone scraping against granite. With one deafening shot, Money ended it. Little Bill collapsed for good, his lawless brand of justice now erased by the very force he claimed to oppose. The remaining townsfolk, men who had once laughed with Little Bill, who'd cheered his cruelty, stood frozen. Not one dared to move. Not one dared to breathe. They had watched a myth come alive and tear through their world in less than 2 minutes. Money turned toward them, rain still dripping from his hat, face hardened into something that no longer resembled a man. "Any man I see out there with a gun, I'm going to kill him. Any sumbitch takes a shot at me, I'll kill his wife, his friends, and burn his damn house down." The words didn't echo. They slammed into the room like iron bars locking a cell shut. No one questioned him. No one challenged him. Even the bravest of them knew that this wasn't some outlaw bluffing in a saloon. This was judgment itself, wearing the face of William Money. He holstered his shotgun, glanced once more at Ned's body hanging outside the saloon, then turned and walked into the night as thunder rolled above. The storm outside hadn't lessened. It grew heavier, as if the heavens themselves were mourning Ned's unjust death and the blood that had been spilled in that saloon. William Money stepped out, his boots splashing in the mud, soaked in rain, but untouched by the fear that gripped the town. No one followed him. The crowd gathered under the eaves of the buildings, afraid to move, speak, or even blink as the deadly silhouette of the man vanished into the night mist. They had seen justice, raw, unfiltered, and unkind. It didn't wear a badge. It didn't follow the law. It rode into town, answered violence with violence, and left only silence in its wake. He walked past Ned's body, his oldest friend, the only man who had believed in redemption, the man who had put down the gun for the woman he loved, only to be dragged back into bloodshed and murdered for a bounty he never claimed. Money looked up at the sign where his friend hung like a warning, then looked away. Not out of cowardice, but because he had nothing left to give him but vengeance, and it was already delivered. He mounted his horse in the pouring rain. With each stride through the town's muddy street, the town's soul seemed to shrink into itself. Every footfall of his horse echoed not just in the physical world, but in the hearts of every man who watched him go. That night, William Money disappeared from Big Whiskey, but his legend did not. Some said he rode back to Kansas to raise his children, keeping the promise he made to his dead wife. Others whispered that he returned to his old ways, haunting the frontier as a ghost in black, killing those who believed they were above consequence. But one thing was certain: Big Whiskey never forgot the night the devil came to town in the name of justice. A wooden cross was eventually erected on the hill where Ned was buried. No name, no dates, just a single word carved in: friend. It was all Money left behind. That and the silence.